In this episode, we're going to get started on the due diligence process. Finding a property that you want to buy is only part of the process. Every property needs to be thoroughly evaluated before you buy it. Today, we're going to make sure you know where to start.
Welcome to Your First Home Buyer Guide, the podcast for first home buyers who want to get it right.
I'm Megan and that was Veronica. We're both buyer's agents and probably old enough to be your mums. But that's a good thing because between us, we've got over 40 years experience and we are going to share with you bucket loads of stories about avoidable mistakes. Together, we're going to make sure that you get unbiased and real information that you can rely on so you can get where you want to be without missing a step.
Now, we've got loads of great tips for you in this episode, and if you'd like more useful tools, head over to the website homebuyeracademy.com.au. There you'll find free checklists that you can download, a free mini course on how to price a property, and our Where to Buy workshop for only $39. Priceless stuff, really.
Bargain. But before we get into the interesting stuff in this week's episode, here's the boring bit, the disclaimer. You, of course, know that nothing in this podcast is to be taken as personal advice. We always recommend getting the advice of an expert in their field of expertise. Now, we've done our very best to ensure that the content is correct at the time of recording, but things change. So check with the relevant government authority or your advisors to get the most up-to-date information.
Today, we're talking about the due diligence process. Once you've found the property that you want to buy, your job is not done. You simply cannot just hand it. It's just starting, yeah. You can't hand it over to your conveyancer or your solicitor and expect every stone to be unturned. It's up to you to make sure that you uncover any reasons why you might end up regretting buying this property.
Do you know, as a buyer's agent, Veronica, how many times have we told people it's as much about the properties that we recommend you don't buy as the one that we recommend that you do, isn't it? And the due diligence is a massive part of that process.
It's the old fish that John Westridge.
So true.
But the thing is, sometimes they look all shiny and beautiful and the scales look lovely and the eyes look bright, but on the inside, something's been eating their guts away and you don't want to eat that salmon.
You don't want to be kissing that fish.
Do you?
All right, so we're talking here, we always do. We're talking here about knowing what you don't know. It's a massive part of the reason that Veronica and I put our heads together to create Your First Home Buyer Guide, because we know that there are so many things that people don't know. You don't know what you don't know, and it's just such a big problem if you don't know what to find out. So the devil is in the detail with property and all sorts of things can go wrong. That's why a thorough due diligence process is so important. You're really looking to see if there are any reasons you should not buy the property.
Absolutely. And it's hard because often you think the hardest thing is saving up the deposit and finding the property you want to buy, and then you don't want to let go of it. You go, no, I'll smooth over all those rough edges.
I can live with that dumpster next door.
Yeah. So before we start on what you need to do, let's give you some examples of what can go wrong. Okay. Now, these are all completely avoidable, but before we get into them, Megan's got a lovely background. For those of you watching the video, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
I do like to have these unusual homes in the background, Veronica.
You do.
I like to watch this on YouTube, and this one is the Bubble House. This is in Queensland. It's in Ipswich, and it took the owner, who actually was an owner builder architect, it's taken him over a decade to create this house. It is a very unique taste, and Veronica, I think you've got a special name for it.
It's like living in a cluster of eyeballs.
We love these unique homes. Well, unique taste, each to their own. Obviously, the owner loves it, but it's one of those ones when it came up, I think it's one of the most viewed properties that was on a realestate.com. I don't think it was listed for sale, but it was on a realestate.com article, and very, very a high level of interest in it because it's so unique.
See, we should look into that. I thought it was on the market.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
And it's
Maybe
one of
I
those
should fact check myself.
Yeah, it's one of those classics though. It's like that might have a lot of interest, and that definitely ticks a scarcity box. And anyone who's been listening to this will know that we love scarcity, but it's got to be scarce with high demand. And I'm not sure there's that many people want to live in a cluster of eyeballs.
We digress because the people who are listening to this have absolutely no idea, or they may have an idea because you might have actually read the article and seen the property.
Maybe
anyway,
we should put the link in the show notes.
Google
it. The cluster of eyeballs house in Ipswich.
It's now, the bubble house.
Let's talk about some of the things that can go wrong that are completely avoidable with some basic due diligence. Do you want to hit it off with one, Megan?
I think a big one for people who are buying apartments is, there's a few actually, I could go on and on, but one of the big ones is unexpected special levies. Now, everybody knows that you have to pay body corporate or strata levies when you own something that's in a community title or part of a strata title complex. And they're the two things, the sinking fund or the capital works fund and the admin fund. But what can come up is something that's completely unexpected. If there has been some unexpected damage or there hasn't been enough put into the capital works fund to anticipate and be ready for works that are coming up in the near future. So you can actually buy a property, and if you haven't done the right investigations, you could be hit with a $30,000 or $40,000 extra levy, which if you've just bought your first home would be almost, so gut-wrenching to have that kind of extra additional expense.
Terrible.
Can find it out beforehand, though. You have to know the right due diligence to do.
Absolutely. And in fact, I very recently heard a story about somebody that did buy a property in Sydney, didn't realise what they needed to look for. They got a strata report. They read it. They didn't understand what they were reading. Their lawyer didn't advise them on it. There was actually stuff in the minutes there that for me, reading as many as we read in my business, we would know immediately how are they going to fund that? But these people didn't know, and so they bought it. And then a week after settling, they moved in and got a bill for $7,000.
Wow.
And
that's just not money that people have lying around after they've put everything into their purchase. I mean, hopefully everybody has got a contingency fund, but often that contingency fund is for other kinds of contingencies.
Yeah, well, and you know what? That was totally knowable. That's the worst thing. And it didn't have to be disclosed for whatever reasons. But
it was.
Totally
it was knowable. On the minutes.
It was, actually, you're right. It was disclosed.
It was there. It was there. You've just got to know what to look for, and that's the important bit. Now, a big thing for Brisbane, something that you can avoid and if you do your due diligence right, is flood zones and overland flow. Now, it's not just flood zones, it's actual individual properties. And it's not just flood from rising water. It's actually because in Queensland, the topography is quite steep and undulating, and water has to flow from a top of a mountain down to a bottom, and it takes a path, and that's called an overland flow path. You need to know what impact that will and won't have, because it could restrict you from any sort of development. If it's a house, you might want to raise it and build underneath. That's a very typical strategy for extending a house. Or if you want to knock down and build something new, it might have quite a big impact on that. So not just doing a flood report, but actually then understanding what the impact is and isn't is quite a big one that you can avoid if you know what you're looking for.
That's it. And this stuff isn't actually too difficult to find, so
it's free.
But yeah, exactly. It's free.
That is, the flood report's free. Yeah.
It comes down to knowing what you don't know. You're never going to look for it if you don't realise that you need to know it. And that's really what this podcast and that's what your first home buyer guide is all about. An example of how that can impact a first home buyer, there was recent flooding up in the north coast of New South Wales, and I saw this on the news, and there was a fellow, he'd just bought his first home and he didn't insure it because when he went to insure it after buying it, I don't know how he managed to do this and buy it and borrow money and all the rest of it. Don't know quite the ins and outs, but he didn't insure it because when he went to get it insured, he was given a bill of something like $13,000. Which is a huge insurance bill.
So the insurer has flagged it for flood,
yes.
Potentially.
Yep, and that would have been, particularly in New South Wales, that's in the zoning certificate. We'll get to that in a minute. So this is all very knowable stuff, very avoidable. He didn't insure his home. And then what happened? A flood came and, of course, basically ruined his home, took out all the furniture, everything, and it's significant damage. So, these things are tragic when they go wrong and very, very avoidable.
Yeah, absolutely. Unexpected plumbing issues is another one that you can actually uncover by having the right inspection done at the right time. Often your building and pest inspection is not going to reveal plumbing issues. They're not qualified as plumbers. They're usually qualified as building inspectors, and usually they're looking for structural things. So don't expect them to tell you if the door handle's a little bit loose or the washer on the tap is leaking a little bit. That's not a building inspector's job. You need to have a think about what other kinds of professionals you might need. Plumbing is one, engineers is one. I've just had a purchase that is conditional on a number of factors, one of them being an engineer's report, and we found that a retaining wall that's worth about $120,000 has failed. So had the buyers not undertaken that $500 inspection, then they wouldn't have known that, and they would have been up for 120, whereas we can actually renegotiate that off the purchase price. So these are really important things to know, because they can really add up if you don't know how to investigate them as part of your due diligence process. Veronica, what is happening a lot at the moment in higher density areas is you might buy an apartment and it have a lovely view and outlook and really nice natural light and airflow, but you've forgotten to check if there's anything going on around it that might impact your particular apartment.
Well, not just your apartment, but if you have a house and if the area around you has been rezoned to a higher density, you could be surrounded by houses today, and then in a year's time or 2 years' time, whatever, you could find that you've actually got apartment buildings being built around you. And it's funny, only yesterday I was just doing some research, a price research for a property looking at for a client in Marrickville in Sydney. And this one popped up as a recent sale, a property that I had looked through for a client. But as soon as I got there, I went, nah, we're not buying that. And the reason I knew was because it was on the corner of a lane, and on the other side of that lane was some light industrial buildings. And a lot of those have been converted to, some of them being converted to apartments, some of them, various sort of redevelopment of these areas. But I looked along that road and I could see that everything else was 6 stories high.
And God, so that's such good insight.
This would have, all it needed was this to be sold off to a developer. And I didn't even look any further because I could see the precedent was there all the way along that road. And I just thought, this is just going to happen. But even if it hadn't already happened, that would be what I would check.
Yeah.
That's and it's very easy to find this stuff out, and it's free.
Lots of places to find that. In fact, we talk about that in the course and have some resources around free ways to do your own research. Because it's not your solicitor's job to do this. It's actually your job to do these sorts of things. The conveyancer doesn't go and look at the property. They don't know what's in the street. They can only access certain searches, and it's actually you as the buyer. The onus is on you to know what to look for, know what questions to ask, and then know who to help you interpret the information that you find. And you can do it, but you just need to be very, very aware. So how do you avoid making a mistake like the ones that we've talked about, Veronica? What are the sorts of things that people need to do?
Well, obviously, you can sign up for your first home buyer guide, and we have an entire module on the evaluation process, because it is a step-by-step process. No, we harp on step-by-step, get it all done in the right order.
In the right order.
Yes. But
boring,
it's really
but practical.
Important. But today what we're going to do is cover the basic due diligence steps that needs to be done on all properties.
Yeah.
And I guess we start with the legals. And whilst Megan said there that it's not the conveyancers or the lawyers' responsibility to do all of this stuff, it isn't actually. They have contractual, they're looking at the contractual aspect of things, and they will make suggestions, and some of them will make more suggestions than others. But you could line up 10 conveyancers or 10 solicitors, and in terms of whether they give you additional insights and guidance, you will get 10 different standards of advice. So you need to know what it is that you don't know. And that's so, with the contract, it's so important that you understand the mandatory disclosures. So what the vendor has to disclose and what's not mandatory, and what conditions that you can request, and what searches need to be done, and all those sorts of things. So
our work around the country, Veronica, has shown us that every state has a completely different set of mandatory disclosures, all the way from Victoria having quite a strong set of disclosures, but still you need to do your own due diligence around a number of things, all the way to Queensland that has probably the least amount and the most frustratingly absent set of disclosures that you could possibly imagine. So you have to absolutely know what you don't know to know what you need to know where the gaps are. And that's that you can't have a parent that bought in New South Wales and then buy in Queensland and follow their advice. It's going to put you in quite a dangerous kind of situation in terms of their expectations about what a seller should disclose to you.
Absolutely. And on the other side of things, from one state to another, your commitment to actually purchase the property is different. In some places you think because you've had your offer accepted that you're committed, but you're not. And anyone could come and make an offer. And in others, when your offer is accepted, you are committed and you don't even realise you're
not getting out. Yeah.
So understanding that, that's why it's so important to get good legal advice, somebody really experienced in the area, but that's an essential part of the due diligence.
That's a contract side of things. Yeah. And it's a good discussion to have, but remember the solicitor hasn't seen the property. They haven't been in the street. They don't know a lot of things that only you will know from going to the property or having someone who actually knows what they're talking about and what to look at, go and have a look at the property for you. It's things like surrounding developments, the potential to lose your light, your view, your privacy, your peace, your quiet. You talked about, one of those big mistakes that can be made if you don't get the due diligence right is losing, the potential for rezoning around you. Now, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows if a local government is going to change at the next election and there be some rezoning of land. That you can't anticipate for that. But what you can do is have a look at what the current zoning is, understand what could happen, and have a look at, as you said earlier, the precedents around what has been happening in this street. Has there been some 6-storey developments done? Is there 15-level apartments, or can they only keep to 2 levels? And what does that mean to me if they do turn it into 2-level townhouses? That may be less of an impact than a 6-storey, 130 apartment complex that has so many more cars coming and going in the street, apart from anything else that it interferes with.
And even on the sort of a smaller scale is if you're in a pure residential area and you've got neighbours over the back fence, over the, on either side, and you want to know, well, have they been trying to get plans approved? Are they going to go up a 2nd story and block out your light? Or are they going to be trying to put windows that stare into your backyard? Or, are they going to block a view or an outlook or breezes? Or there's all sorts of things that neighbours can do. And of course, it's not just what are they in the process or what has been approved or what are they trying to get approved, but what could be approved, different areas have different requirements and there's different limits. So it's good to understand that, because not only does it give you an idea about the scope for your own improvement of your property, but, your neighbours can improve their properties too. And you want to make sure that when they do so, it's not going to negatively impact on your enjoyment and also the value of your property.
Absolutely. Major infrastructure, even minor infrastructure projects, these can be good and bad. And they're things that, as part of a due diligence process, if you get this right and you ask the right questions in the right places and do the right research, you can put yourself in a really good position to capitalise on infrastructure projects. Or if you miss it and you get it wrong, you could be looking at a very major intersection being upgraded near you, or as is happening in Brisbane at the moment, there's new tunnelling works for the Cross River Rail. If you'd bought a few years ago, you weren't aware of that happening, you could end up with some tunnelling underneath you. All of these sorts of things, if you get that right, you can take advantage of it. If you overlook it, shortcut it, or get it wrong, could have quite a big impact on your quality of life, let alone your ability to realise some capital gain in that property that you've purchased.
Now, with a lot of infrastructure, a lot of, property advisors and experts, they run around saying, got to buy where there's infrastructure. But they don't sort of get into the nitty gritty of, well, some of it's good, some of it's bad. And yes, sure, a major road might be really great for transport, or a train line. It might be really good in terms of connectivity and everything. But are you going to be affected by noise, or is that you're going to see it because you don't really want to
Is
be
the park
looking.
and ride going to be next door across the road?
Yes.
You know, if the park and ride is near, maybe the train line isn't that close, but if there's an upgrade to a park and ride, and I assume I'm using a similar sort of reference that you would use, you know, where people go and park to then get on the train, that's a huge amount of traffic that's going to be introduced to a residential street if you're not aware that that's going to happen.
Yeah, and then, you know, in Sydney, for instance, there's been all this tunnelling for various roadworks that's been going on. In fact, there's Spaghetti Junction almost directly under my house, and that wasn't on the cards when I bought either. Right. And it hasn't. It's 50 metres underground. Honestly, I felt, and it's 50 metres to the side. Like I'm not directly above it, but I did feel a vibration once, right there. But that's sort of not the point. Where having the tunnels under your house is fine. It's where the exhaust stacks are and the on and off ramps, and also when there's been some exposed flyovers and stuff like that. Like they have a massive negative impact on your enjoyment. Now, I know people have bought some of those areas 10, 20 years ago, and there was no hint that this was going to happen. So some of this stuff you can't prepare for. You really can't. However, there have been people that have bought there in very recent years that could have found this stuff out and didn't, and just had no awareness to even look for it. And so that's the sort of thing that you need to be looking for when you are buying, just making sure there's nothing, you know, green fields or brown fields in this sort of development side, the infrastructure side of things that could really negatively impact the property.
And then there's also that, I love how you referred to it, was it Spaghetti Junction under your house?
Yes.
Or beside under your house. But that can also be in the form of council infrastructure too. If you're not looking or don't know what to look for in terms of underground services, you might actually find that you purchase a property, and this is particularly relevant for houses. You might end up that you purchase a property that could have maybe sewer or stormwater, even if there's not a manhole access, which is the above ground visual manhole access to council infrastructure. You may not have a manhole, which is usually a registered easement and will come up on a title search, but you can actually have unregistered easements, which is the infrastructure that goes underground but doesn't have to be registered on the title. That can impact your ability to put a pool in, to do renovations, any kind of excavations. Now, all of this information can be found out for free, but you've got to know where to look and then how to interpret the information once you find it, and then how to make a decision on whether it does or doesn't impact you in a positive or negative way. So this is stuff that can be found, that if you don't find it, you could end up with something that you really didn't want to buy.
I know. Imagine buying a house in Brisbane and thinking you're going to put a pool in and finding the sewer line runs directly under the backyard and you can't do it. That would be a nightmare.
Very hot. And look, plunge pools are great, but really they're not.
When they spas on your back veranda. No, thank you, on a real pool. Well, actually, the sewer diagrams are interesting because that's, talked about mandatory disclosure before. So in whatever jurisdiction you're in, and when I say jurisdiction, I'm talking about state or territory, there are property laws that govern the property transactions in that state or territory, right? So we mentioned before that different jurisdictions have different types of disclosure that are mandatory. And in New South Wales, for example, a sewer diagram has to be attached to the contract. It's an essential document. And so on that, you can actually see where the board's sewer runs. So it's simple. You can actually just flick through the contract and see it for yourself, right?
But if you don't know what you're looking at, Veronica,
or if you don't even think it's in there,
if you don't even think to look for it, and you buy it, it's actually been disclosed to you. So you have no recourse. There's no ability to terminate if someone says to you, "Oh, does the sewer run under that property?" You think, "Oh, I don't know. How would I know that?"
What does that mean? Oh, you mean the toilet's flushing
into
something? Well, what about in Queensland, though? I don't believe the vendor has to provide one. Is that correct?
Absolutely not. No.
Don't have to worry about that.
No, they
stuff.
don't.
You'll work it out
but
later.
you can access it for free. In fact, we as a buyer's agency, that's one of the things that we do if we like a property and it stacks up on all of its research at the desk, we'll often do that search before we go to the property, because if we've got someone who wants to do certain things, whether it's a renovation or a pool or whatever the case may be, it's not even worth our time to go to have a look at that property if there is underground services that are going to prohibit that. So it is a quick one. It's an easy one. You just got to know what to look for and what to do with the information once you get it. Veronica, zoning certificates is one that's a little bit unique to you. I think they might be called something different in other states.
Yeah, they've got different names depending on where you are. They're commonly referred to as a zoning certificate. They are mandatory in Victoria in the Section 32. They are mandatory in New South Wales in the contract. I know they're not mandatory in Queensland.
They're an optional search.
And what a zoning certificate does is it's from the council, and it outlines a whole bunch of information. There's really interesting stuff to understand about what you're buying and where you're buying it. And it covers things like flood zones, bushfire risk. And I discovered something the other day that I actually didn't know myself, which was if you're in a strata building and the council has issued a fire order on that building, that will be in there as well. Road widening.
Can I just share with everybody, how long have you been in property?
There you go. I've been in property for 21 years and I just learned
And what did you just discover? Right. So that's the collective. Yeah. That's the collective of sharing the knowledge with everybody. And I think that's one thing that you and I are really passionate about is everything that we learn along the way. We actually want to get it out to everybody else and share it. Sorry, I interrupted your train of thought then, but I thought it was a good
that's
point.
all right. Because it then just shows that I still don't know everything.
We never know everything.
And I don't know everything, and we can add up to over 40 years experience. You guys have got Buckleys, so you need to listen to this.
Listen to your mother.
Listen to your mums. We've got your best interests at heart. Oh dear. What's something else that the due diligence
neighbourhood
you can easily do?
You can do this, but there's some physicality around it. Google Maps is not your answer when it comes to this part of the due diligence, and that's your neighbourhood. You can do walkability scores. You can research. What's that thing we found the other day? What was the score? The studliness score or something? Hipster score. You can find out the hipster score. Studliness.
Very important.
What
are you been up to? Studliness. That's hilarious. Hipster score is very important.
You can check the hipster score of a particular suburb. And what did one of our students find out? The place they were interested in had like a negative 20,000 something hipster score.
Hopefully, and that was actually in the where to, not the where to buy. That was in the stepping stone strategy workshop. Hilarious.
Anyway, so neighbourhood. This is a physicality thing. This is going and having a look at, how far is it to go and get a coffee? How far, if you've got children, how far is it to the park?
But what's on the way? What's in between you and the park?
Have you got to walk through an area that's a little bit undesirable? Those sorts of things. What's the community like? What are the people like? What are the people doing with houses around the area? You can't find that on Google Maps. That's too old. That information is way out of date by the time it makes it to Google Maps. Safety aspects, Veronica. What are the crime rates like? What are the safety aspects of it? If you're walking along, are there a lot of people who are out in their front yards having a beer at 12 o'clock in the afternoon? All these things, the physicality of actually doing that local kind of neighbourhood, wander around.
Midday, that's fine. It's the afternoon.
Day drinking is okay at midday, is it?
I'm kidding. No, you're on the
work. At the moment, Veronica's in lockdown. Could be any time.
Everybody's actually at home drinking at 12 o'clock.
Everybody threw Dry July out the window in Sydney.
Hilarious. So, and on that, actually, that's actually a really good segue into not doing all your research online. There's people that actually in Melbourne, we're discussing this morning actually in Melbourne, during their lockdown, people were buying property sight unseen. That is just nuts, right? No market is so hot that you should be so desperate you should ever buy property sight unseen. But it does go down to the same.
There's a small caveat there, Veronica, and that is if you've engaged a buyer's agent to act on your behalf and they are there looking out for your interests and inspecting that property on your behalf, that is the only time that you should ever trust an individual to buy a property without you physically seeing it yourself.
That's your eyes and ears. That's not sight unseen. That's you're paying for those eyes.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I mean, you can't actually get the feel and the vibe of a place online. You know, you just can't. So you do need to get out there. And interesting enough, because of course we are in lockdown in Sydney, we are able to see property, inspect property. And what I'm saying to and you can get out to exercise. So what I'm saying to my clients is that if they're not completely familiar with the suburb that we're looking at a property in, a specific property, we're being very responsible in terms of actually not leaving home unnecessarily, but use your exercise time to walk around that new area. And I know it's not going to be quite the same because, of course, your cafes are shut and all the rest of it, but you are going to get a bit of a sense, much more of a sense than trying to do it online. So working out the neighbourhood and really sussing out, you know, the whole community that you're about to join is really essential due diligence.
Absolutely. Look, this is such a small part of due diligence. These are just some of the things that, you know, we were tossing this around the other day and we just wanted to, I guess, open your thought process to some of the things that you need to do, but there is a massive list of due diligence that you need to do, whether it's a house that you're buying or a townhouse or a villa or an apartment. There's actually so much difference in the due diligence that you've got to do, and there's some commonalities as well. There's additional due diligence that you'll have to do for strata properties that you wouldn't need to do for a house, and of course there are a lot of things you need to look into with a house that you wouldn't necessarily have to look into with a strata property. So Veronica, for the complete rundown on all the due diligence,
you need to go to Home Buyer Academy. Do the course. I mean, I know that it's $749. I get that that's a lot of money, but you know what? It's a small price to pay to ensure that you know what you need to do in the right order so that you don't miss out on any critical information. You know, those stories we told you earlier about what can go wrong, they were just off the top of our heads in about 5 minutes. We can go on and on.
The list goes on and on.
It does. And we don't want you to have one of those stories to tell.
Absolutely. Look, that's good advice. I'm glad we did this because you and I do a lot of due diligence every day on the properties that we're looking at for people, and being able to share some of that knowledge and that inside information, I think is quite helpful for people to then go forward and say, all right, well, I need to upskill in this area. In this episode, we've covered a very small part of our 10-step online course for first-time buyers. If you would like to learn more about the process and how to buy without making a mistake, then head over to our website, www.homebuyeracademy.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you won't miss an episode. And if you like what you've heard today, please give us an iTunes review. 5 stars would be wonderful. It will help others find us as well.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you found this really useful. And if you have, please share the love with others who you know are in the same boat. We'll be back next week with some more priceless stuff.